Good morning, YouTube, and welcome to the Reptile Barn. Because it is hatching season for ball python breeders everywhere, we are going to talk today about what to expect when you get your baby ball python. So here to assist me today is Funky. He's a Mojave at least, possibly orange blossom if that gene proves to be a thing. So I want to go over several things today. And this video is mostly going to be for newcomers to the reptile hobby, people getting their first ball python, right? There's a lot of things to think about. For people who've had a lot of reptiles, we don't consciously think about all these things. We just kind of go through the setup and it's not that overwhelming. But for somebody who is trying to do the research and get their first baby ball python and what to expect from the snake, what to do for the snake, what you should have before the snake gets there, it can be a lot to think about. So right off the bat, some of the questions I get asked from people. Do you have any snakes that don't bite? Do you have any snakes that are eating frozen thawed? How big is the snake? How big should the cage be? Do you feed the snake in its own cage or in a separate tub? So let's go over some of these things. First off, do you have any snakes that don't bite? No, all snakes bite, right? That don't bite people? Most of my snakes don't bite people. But I never ever guarantee to a customer or to anybody this snake will not bite you. I didn't tie its mouth shut. I'm not going to tie its mouth shut, so it could bite you. If you scare it, right? Now, for somebody who's on my waiting list for a baby ball python, they're going to get a very young ball python, right? Because as soon as it hatches, I'm going to wait for it to shed. I want to see it eat at least 3 times. I really prefer 5 times with no refusals. And I want to see it poop. And I want all those things to be normal and easy before I send out this snake. But even in that scenario, we're talking about a 4-week-old snake, right? Being sent off to somebody's house. It's going to be put in a box, shipped across the country. It's going to be scared. It's going to be stressed. It's very, very young. It hasn't had a lifetime of good interactions to build up kind of a confidence with humans. So it's going to get pulled out of a box, bleary-eyed in a new place, new smells, new sights, new everything, and it's going to be terrified, and it might bite, right? Or at least hiss, puff up, bluff strike where they don't really open their mouth. It's going to show some signs of fear, right? Unlike this guy who's been handled so much for many, many months. He has no fear of humans left. He's not even head shy anymore. I'm messing with his face and, you know, he moves away, but he's not doing the jerking thing. So this is what you want, right? You want a snake that you've handled so much that it is socialized, it's friendly, it's curious. I've been handling mice and quail all day. I reek of food items, but he knows me. He knows I'm not food. He's not trying to eat me or bite me or anything, right? He's curious. He's looking around. He wants to know where this food is, but he's not going to bite me, right? This animal, very, 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 very likely, will never bite me again in his life. He is totally socialized, right? And he's not even that old. He's 8 months old, maybe less. So anyway, the more you handle them without scaring them, if their environment, which we'll get to, is correct and all of its husbandry is good, handle your snake a lot. There's some great videos out there about the confident grab, right? If you have a bitey snake. I actually don't currently have any bitey snakes, so I can't show you this. But you have a snake that's all essed up. It's got its neck ready to strike at you. You just reach in. Don't reach right at its face because you're going to get bit. Reach in behind it, pick it up. Don't do the kind of thing because then you're going to get bit, right? I can't stress this enough. Ball pythons are just not aggressive. They are not aggressive. They are afraid. And we're not talking about food response here right now. We're just talking about bites that come from fear. You have to teach your snake to not fear you. How do you do that? You pick it up. You hold it, right? If you absolutely have to, put on some leather gloves so that if it does bite you, you can't even feel it, right? I mean, this guy, he cannot hurt me. but the strike is still scary, right? I still jump if I get struck at. So yeah, I'll move on from this topic, but it's so important. So next, what is it eating? I usually switch all of my babies that are going to be for sale to frozen thawed very quickly, because not because I feel frozen thawed is superior to live feeding. I actually don't, but because it's very, very easy for a customer who prefers live to go from frozen thawed to live, okay? It is not easy for a customer who prefers frozen thawed to go from live to frozen thawed. So I try and make that transition for you, because if you want to transition back, it's easy as cake. You throw a live mouse in there, whatever you're feeding it, a rat pup, and it's going to eat it. They like live very much. That's what they're programmed for, right? So generally, if the snake is more than 2 or 3 months old, it's coming from me, coming from the reptile barn, it's probably on frozen thawed, right? If it's a really, really young hatchling, again, if you're someone on the waiting list, because our waiting list is getting pretty extensive, it might still be on live, just depends on how quickly after it hatches you want me to ship it to you, right? Some snakes switch very quickly. Some snakes, they hatch out of their egg, they shed, I offer them a frozen thawed little rat pink or a little mouse fuzzy, and they eat it immediately. Others take forever. Where do you feed it? I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna feed it in its own enclosure. I'm not saying it's wrong to feed it in a separate tub, but especially a baby, it's already nervous. Eating is vulnerable for a snake. They have a giant meal hanging half into their body and half out on the ground. They can't defend themselves. They can't run away. They can't even hiss at you when they have that meal in them. They're vulnerable, right? So you're really just adding an extra layer of stress on top if you feed them in a separate tub. You come in, you pull them out of their enclosure that they're comfortable in, you stick them in a blank tub with nothing, and you feed them there. If you have a confident snake, that's great. That's totally fine. If you have a nervous snake that's not a great eater, you are making it worse, okay? That's just my 2 cents. Disagree with me if you want, but you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I can't say that. But anyways, that's what I believe, okay? What else do we need to cover? What size tank? There's 2 schools of thought. The reason that this even comes up is because ball pythons, as a fossorial species, meaning they live underground for a large part of their life, in tunnels, in termite mounds, that kind of thing, they do not thrive in wide open spaces, right? And to a ball python, you stick it in a big old 60-gallon tank, that's wide open spaces to this guy, right? So you have 2 options. 1, put it in a little tank, at least while it's little, right? And as it grows, you get bigger and bigger tanks. This is expensive and wasteful, but you can do it. If the money and the space isn't an issue to you, go ahead, do it. And some people do it because really, truly, they love decorating new tanks. They love it. It's fun. It's a artistic pursuit. And so they're like, man, like every year I get to decorate a whole new enclosure as my snake grows. Okay, great, do that. But you don't have to. If you would like to buy the adult-sized enclosure for your ball python, even if it's a baby, you can do that. But you must set it up correctly. This means a lot of hides. And I do not mean those little half logs. Those are not real hides. Those are great, they're pretty, the snake will use it. But a hide has 1 opening. It's a very small opening, barely big enough for your snake to get through. And once your snake's entire body is inside the hide, it should be pretty snug. That's a hide. Anything else is not a hide, okay? It should basically feel like there's a hole in the ground and they crawled into a tiny, dark little tunnel or something, a hole in the ground, right? Usually, your ball python is going to do much, much better if there's quite a bit of substrate. The reptile carpet, blank newsprint, all these things people use, I can't even really make myself say that's fine. I don't believe it's fine. I have seen a massive change in their behavior and their eating, even things like their humidity retention of a good substrate like aspen or cocoa or
skin.
yeah, even their skin looks better if you have them on a good substrate. So I recommend that for your snake. You can do that for your snake, right? Anyways, lots of hides, including hides on the cool end, in the middle, and the warm end. Like at least 3 hides, at least 2 hides, right? On the coolest side and the warmest side. But really, if you have a big old tank for a tiny little ball python, lots of hides, good substrate, a nice water bowl that your snake can get all the way into if it wants, that you clean all the time. If it's all scummy, snakes don't like scummy water, right? I don't like scummy water. They don't like scummy water. And it's going to make them sick. If they bathe in water that's really disgusting, they can have skin fungus problems. Just avoid that by cleaning the water bowl. If you're in a glass tank, there is an entire subculture of reptile keepers that are insistent that glass tanks are the devil. I completely disagree. They're fine if you do it properly. The temperatures still have to be within your snake's parameters. Glass tanks are a little bit harder to do that with. The humidity needs to be within certain parameters. Glass tanks usually come with a screen top. That makes it a little harder. But if you're willing to put in the work to make the temperature and the humidity and the hides and the substrate and everything correct, the glass tanks look beautiful. They're great. Now, I will say, you are very likely going to get your big, beautiful glass tank. You put your snake in it, the inside's perfect, and it still stresses out and doesn't want to eat because glass doesn't make sense to a reptile. It sees all that space beyond and thinks, oh my gosh, I'm exposed. Predators could come eat me, right? It always hides, never wants to come out. It's never basking. It's never eating for you. And you're like, what's wrong with my snake? I gave it a beautiful home. Well, it thinks it's in a giant open room, right? So sometimes at the beginning of its life, you're going to have to take paper or something and cover the sides of the tank so it can't see out. Totally ruins the viewing pleasure for you and your family, but for the snake's purposes, it's much happier, right? Anyways, so does that make sense? If you want to start your tiny snake in a big tank, it must be full of stuff. Visual obstacles, lots of hiding places throughout the entire temperature gradient. They have to have a thermal gradient, meaning there's a warm side and it gets gradually cooler, right? If you see, oh, ball pythons need a basking spot of 90 degrees and you make the whole cage 90 degrees, you are slowly killing your snake. They can't handle that. But if you read, oh, they need an ambient temperature of 82 degrees and you make the whole thing that, you're going to start to give them problems because they sometimes need a boost of heat. So give them heat on one end, about 90 degrees to 92, 93, somewhere in that range, all the way down to low 80s, right? Even at night, high 70s is fine. They don't seem to need UV, but pretty much any animal is going to benefit from a low dosage of UV. This is a more nocturnal species. They're underground a lot. They're not exposed to blazing sun. If you go get a light that you're using for your bearded dragon and you put it on your ball python, you're going to roast him. So, we've covered a lot of topics now. I want to go over the actual event of receiving your ball python, what it's going to be like for you, okay? I ship everything through FedEx, right? I use a service called Ship Your Reptiles. So on the day that I ship, you are going to get an email saying, here's your tracking number through FedEx, and you can track it. 99% of the time, it's either going to get routed through Memphis, Tennessee, or Indianapolis. Okay, one of those places. Occasionally, if you're in California, it will stay in-state in California. It'll just go straight from me to California somewhere at a big distribution center and then routed to you. Okay, but usually it's going to be Memphis or Indianapolis. It's going to stay there overnight. Early in the morning, you're going to see it get on a plane to your state where it'll go to a distribution center. Then it will be trucked usually from there to your local FedEx hub. It's not a typical station. It's like a shipping center where they accept live animals. Most of the FedEx stations don't. So if you're confused why it's not coming to your most local FedEx station, that's why. That one must not be one that's a shipping center that accepts live animals. But usually, most places in the US, there's still a shipping center very close to your house. If you requested that your snake be held at the hub, which I often recommend because then it doesn't have to go on a delivery truck, we'll talk about that in a second, but if it's held at the hub for you, once you get a notification saying it's ready for pickup, you drive there, you show them your ID, pick up your snake. You had already paid previously, so you're good to go. You just grab your snake, you go home. It's in a box, about 12 inches long, okay? You're going to cut it open. You're going to see some paperwork. There's going to be some styrofoam, like some insulation. Take that off. Your snake's going to be in some padding. I use crumpled up newspaper usually, but there's cotton and other things. There's a snake bag in there. You're going to open that up. There's your snake, okay? So that's kind of the process. Or if you have it delivering straight to your house, you're going to wait till, depends on where you are in the country. If you're in a big city, it might be to your house by 9:30, 10:30 in the morning, the day after I ship, right? Because they're overnighted. If you're more rural, it could be 4:30 in the afternoon. This is another reason why I often recommend that you not have it delivered straight to your house if at all possible, because you kind of just have to sit there at your house and not leave until your snake gets there. So if the driver has a delay and you had plans at 2 and you expected it at 10:30 that morning, you can't leave because he's not supposed to leave a live snake on your porch, right? It could roast in the sun, it could get rained on, it could get too cold, a lot of things could go wrong. So you have to stay in your house until your snake gets there. If you have it sent to the hub, they'll just hold it for you. And you can go pick it up at your best time of day for you, in a lunch break or after work or before work or whatever it is, right? The other thing is, I just like cutting out the delivery truck if possible. Not because I don't trust the drivers, they do an excellent job, but because the cargo space on the back of a FedEx truck where your snake is going to be sitting is not temperature regulated at all. There's no AC, there's no heat, there's nothing. So if it's wintertime, it's cold back there. If it's summertime, it's even more concerning because it can get really, really hot back there. But we go through, I try and let myself be the one that stresses about making sure temperatures are all correct and heat packs or cool packs or whatever are needed are being used, because I don't want to put that on the customer, right? So we will do our best. But if I ever am telling somebody, if you want a snake from me, I'm like, okay, but we can't ship for another 2 weeks because of weather. That's what I mean is, it's way too hot or it's way too cold or there's a storm coming through Memphis. Something along the route is unsafe to ship your snake. I'm not trying to put you off. I know how horrible it is to wait for a reptile. Once you've selected it, you've paid for it, you have everything ready for it, and then the breeder's like, it needs to wait blah, blah, blah time. And come on! I know that feeling, okay? But it's really for the safety of the animal, okay? Shipping with FedEx is incredibly safe. Their track record is phenomenal. They very, very, very rarely have anything go wrong, right? But that's mostly because they do a good job with their deliveries and breeders are being very careful to ship at safe times. So that is the whole big, long process. The last thing I want to touch on before we end this video is, why won't my snake eat? Okay, we've talked a ton about feeding the snake, but this is such a seminal moment in getting your new snake, especially if you've never had a snake before. This is your first snake, okay? If you've had 14 ball pythons, you understand. Sometimes they just don't eat, right? And it's not just pickiness, it's also physiologically, they have evolved a certain way, right? They are a thick, chunky snake, especially after they've reached adulthood. Food is optional. Really, truly, food for them is optional for long periods of the year. But even for a baby, they can go weeks and weeks and weeks, usually perfectly safely. If you buy one from me, it has already eaten several meals. It's got a nice little boost of energy and protein and fat in its body to sustain it, so that once it gets to you, if it stresses out, because that's what's happening, if it stresses out with its new environment and goes 3, 4, even 5 weeks without eating, this is rare, but it is not unheard of, and generally it is not unsafe either. I have literally had customers buy a snake from me, they try and feed it, the day they open the box, it won't eat, and they're panicking. They try and feed it 2 times a day for the next 3 or 4 days, and it's like, what are you doing shoving this food in my face? I'm still stressed, human. And after 4 days they've had this snake, they take it to the vet because they're convinced that it is dying. Something's wrong with it. They got a sick snake. And I'm begging them to be patient, to just give it some time, but they can't. They panic, right? I'm asking you guys to not do that. Now, it is painful when your snake is not eating. It is. I'm not trying to belittle your pain here, but it is also incredibly normal. This is an animal that has adapted for this for millions of years. It knows what it's doing. If it is a healthy snake that was eating for me, and I will never lie to you, I will not send you a snake that wasn't eating well for me before. So it was eating well, it was digesting because I've seen it poop, it was a normal, solid poop. Everything is normal. It's just stress, I promise. And it's not the end of the world kind of stress. It's not unnatural stress. It's just, oh, there's a new environment, there's a new person, there's new everything. I'm gonna lie low for a bit, get my bearings, become used to my new environment, and eventually I'll start eating again, right? That really is what's happening. If you ever buy an adult ball python, it can be months before it eats for you. And I very rarely sell adult ball pythons, but one time we had somebody who wanted to force feed this snake because it had been like 3 weeks and it hadn't eaten, and I'm like, no, it will never eat again if you do that. I don't force feed any of my snakes. I have assist fed some of my babies that have never eaten before, but an adult that's 10 years old that's eaten its whole life, just don't force feed it, okay? Don't do it. If it has an illness and your vet's like it needs a little nutrition, they might create a slurry and put it in a tube and tube feed your snake, but that's stressful for the snake, but it's nothing like shoving a rat down. It's just don't do that. I'm not trying to panic you by saying you're going to get your snake and it's not going to eat for you. I'm trying to help you see that this is a normal behavior. You don't need to panic. This is even to be expected. Double and triple and quadruple check your husbandry. Make sure your temperatures are dialed in. And I don't just mean air temperature. I mean surface temperature. It's like you always hear people like, man, in Phoenix, you can fry an egg on the concrete. You can. You actually can on a hot day. Because even though the air temperature outside is 110, not hot enough to fry an egg, the concrete with the sun beating down on it, the surface temperature could be 160, 170 degrees, right? It's like burning your feet to step on. If you touch a piece of metal, it's 110 degrees. Like, oh yeah, it's hot. 170 degrees, you're like, oh my gosh, that's really hot, right? That's the power of the sun, right? And you want a basking spot for your snake that the surface is 90 to 95 degrees. I'm not really talking about air temperatures here. And the cool side, the surface, the thing that's touching your snake and directly affecting its temperature of its body. Hold that thought. Now, where was I? I believe I was talking about surface temperatures versus air temperatures. And they make things called a temperature gun, where you can just point it, shoot it, and it tells you what the temperature of that surface is. It's a very useful tool. I consider it a required piece of husbandry of equipment for reptile husbandry. I just don't think you should keep reptiles without one. So do yourselves a favor, spend $10, get a temperature gun, get your ball python's enclosure dialed in before you buy your snake, please, or before it's shipped at least, and enjoy your snake. I didn't make this video to try and stress you guys out with there's all these things you have to get just right or your ball python's gonna die, it's gonna be miserable. That's not what I'm trying to do. And I don't expect most of you people to watch this video all the way through. I'm not trying to make a video for hundreds and hundreds of views and everyone's watching to the bitter end, but I know that somewhere out there there's somebody who really wants a ball python and they're just so afraid that they're gonna mess something up. And I'm trying to walk you through the different things to think about so that you can set up an enclosure before you even have your snake and you can check. What are my temperatures? How big is this tank? How big is the snake that I'm getting? Is it on frozen thawed so I can just already stock my freezer with 10 or 15 frozen mice or rats? Humidity stresses a lot of people out with their ball pythons. Not me. I use quite a bit of substrate. I spray my snakes every single day that they are in shed. I never spray them other than that, literally ever. They get dusty dry occasionally, you know, in the farthest point right before they're going to shed again, it's pretty darn dry. I've never had a problem. When I tried to keep my humidity for these guys at 60 to 70%, which is what you read on lots of care sheets, it was just wild. We had mildew and mold. We had snakes getting fungus between their scales. It was a nightmare. Plus, your hand is dying from spraying so many snakes. It was just the worst, right? They don't need it. I'm completely convinced they don't need it. And I have checked meticulously ambient humidity in the parts of Africa where they live. Some of them are subtropical type environments and it's pretty darn humid. Others are not. And ball pythons are thriving there. When they need extra humidity, they're going to go underground. Underground, even in the middle of the desert, is more humid than above ground, right? So if you're worried about humidity, get a little hide box, shove some sphagnum moss in there that's a little bit damp. There's their underground humid burrow, okay? Too wet is worse than too dry. Too hot is worse than too cold, within reason, okay? Please don't freeze your snakes because you thought you were taking my advice. Just get your temperatures right. 90, 80, you're good to go, okay? So, I know that there's a lot more topics as far as how to keep a baby ball python, what to expect when you get it. There's a lot more we could talk about. This is already dragging on, and I'm not trying to overwhelm you. There's so much information that is available that you want to know, but at the same time, don't research something for 40 years and then realize you never actually got your snake, right? Like, they're a forgiving species. I'm not encouraging you to mess up, but if you're gonna mess up with your ball python rather than an emerald tree boa, right? Because a ball python is tough. An emerald tree boa is not as tough, okay? We're gonna put a little link here, maybe in the video itself, yeah? And in the description as well, to our care sheet for ball pythons. There's lots of good ones out there. This was just ours, so it's the one we have an easy link to. And we do a few things differently, like the humidity, for example. So this is how we keep our ball pythons, right? So if you're going to get one from us and you're like, I really want to keep it the same way you were keeping it, we keep them like our care sheet talks about, okay? So we'll stick that here. And I thank you, any of you who stuck through to the very end of this video, thank you for hanging in there. I know it was a long one. I hope, though, that it's helpful to somebody out there who is on the fence whether they want to get the snake or not because they're afraid of messing up. Get your snake. You will not regret it. They are so wonderful. There's something therapeutic about holding a snake, especially a calm snake that trusts you, that's not trying to bite you. It's just a cool feeling. They learn to enjoy coming out and interacting with you. It's not the same as, you know, a dog that loves you and is fighting off intruders for you, but it's still a pet that you can interact with. It's really fun to feed. They're beautiful to look at. They're just a great animal, right? So thank you guys so much for watching. We appreciate all your support. And until next time, we're the Reptile Barn.